Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Aaron's Spooky Corner for this evening. It's October, it's Halloween, and you know what that means? It's spooky season. More specifically, it's Mike Flanagan season. We have been blessed for the past few years with a Mike Flanagan Netflix series every Halloween time, and this year was no different. This year marks the release of The Fall of the House of Usher, which I have just watched and I thoroughly enjoyed. To preface, I guess I am a very big Mike Flanagan fan. I have watched Bly Manor and Hill House, and I think Midnight Mass might be one of my favorite pieces of media ever. I love Midnight Mass. That's a show that is right up my alley. So I didn't watch The Midnight Club. It was 10 episodes, which is too many. For me, there's way too many episodes. I don't have that kind of time on my hands to watch 10 episodes of television. From what I heard, it was okay. And I might go back and watch it because some of the actors who were in that were in this, and they were really good in this, and made me go, oh, maybe I should have watched The Midnight Club. But at the same point, 10 hours of content. The Fall of the House of Usher has come out, and I think it's as good as some of the best of Flanagan's work. And I think it was a really great build-up for the rest of the kind of mythos and reputation that Flanagan has built himself into now. And I thought it was really fun, and I loved it, and I wanted to talk about it. So today we're going to talk about the entire show, the whole thing. If you haven't seen The Fall of the House of Usher, I will be spoiling it. So go watch that first and then come back. It came out a couple weeks ago, so hopefully everyone's caught up. And if not, go watch it, come back, and then we can chat about everything because there's some goss stuff in here, and you do not want to know what that is before watching the show. I was very eagerly awaiting the release of the show. The cast is phenomenal. It's a lot of the returning faces that we love from the Flanagan verse. A lot of really good names, a lot of really great actors, especially people who have proven themselves to be formidable, especially within Flanagan's own filmography. And to see them all kind of return for this was really great in a way that The Midnight Club felt like, oh, hang on, this is a lot of younger people, which is fine, but it just doesn't have the same name recognition. I think The Fall of the House of Usher definitely has that name recognition, which really entices viewers like me to go, ooh, this is a big return for Flanagan verse. But before I go into episode by episode, I was thinking about how I wanted to structure this video. And when I was kind of brainstorming ideas, my first idea was, oh, of course, each of the kids represent one of the 7 deadly sins. It's so smart. And so I was plotting it out, and I was like, great, this one represents this. And then I got to gluttony, and I was like, oh, none of them really fit into gluttony, and a lot of them kind of overlap. So as much as I think that the 7 deadly sins as a metaphor is very interesting in this, I don't know if it applies so much. So we're just going to go kid by kid, which coincidentally is also episode by episode. So we're just going to tackle it episode at a time, which I think speaks to the structure of this show, specifically the structure of the way in which the show progresses by episode. And then within the episode structure, horror relies a lot on its conventions, especially on people's understanding of those conventions. And so this show, I think, especially eats into that in a really great way of going, you know what to expect. Part of horror is knowing the expectations and then either subverting them or paying them off. That's what good horror is. And I think this show does that in spades. It establishes very quickly who is important, what is important for the episode, and also what is important for the whole story. And I think the structure of the entire show is very, very well written and help the follow of a story that follows so many different characters and also jumps around time a lot. That sticking to a consistent type of structure is really, really great. Like each episode opens with Roderick talking to August about how he is the one who started the curse, and then we get that flash of the kid and how they died, which I really love as a device of this is what you are expecting to see. And it has like a kind of puzzle element for the viewer to go, ooh, hang on, I wonder how that's going to happen. And you see the elements of, oh, that's how they're going to do this, that's how they're going to do this. And I really like that as a motif, as opposed to just going at the very end, boom, the person's dead, and instead showing like their body, or at least their like zombified corpse of, ooh, how is that going to happen? Which then cuts into that person, that specific child story, flashbacks to Roderick back in the day, way back when he and his sister were back doing the thing, which is also that other through line of he and his sister having maybe done something on New Year's Eve. And then back to the kind of end of the episode. And each episode follows that structure pretty much beat for beat. And I think it was very clever the way in which it establishes that very early on in the show and then continues it over and over and over again. So we will be tackling episode by episode, but the kind of arc of Roderick and Madeline's New Year's Eve escapades that ends up getting paid off at the end, I'm not going to touch on that until like the last episode, because I think it all kind of comes through there. So yeah, on to episode 1. From the very beginning, the show established itself, I think, really, really well. Each character is very unique and distinct and has a very specific like style and personality that I think really jumps out in a way that is super interesting. And the way that they introduce them all very early on is really great. I think that the way in which they planned the informant element from the very beginning, which as much as August goes, oh, it was a ploy, there was never an informant, it was just a way to turn you all against each other, that was like pretty obvious from the beginning that there was no informant. The way in which that is used as a plot device to turn the kids against each other, and also encourages the viewer to go, hang on, maybe someone here is not on the same team. And considering that all of the Usher children are unlikable, they're truly unlikable people, it creates a fun kind of way to antagonize them even further and go, well, maybe at least someone is doing a morally correct, quote unquote, morally correct thing, and trying to inform against the rest of the family. So the way in which episode 1 establishes the stakes of the show is really, really great. It establishes Roderick Usher as this kind of like head of the house. It gave me pretty major Succession vibes. There's that scene in the beginning when they're all at the table and they're kind of like just trash talking each other and everything. And it reminded me of like Succession, which like if I was to elevator pitch the show to someone who is not a horror fan, I'd be like, it's Succession meets Final Destination. It's like all the best parts of like fun Succession rich people hijinks mixed with like massive gore horror, which was not something that I'm like a massive fan of. I'm more of a fan of like that kind of interpersonal dynamic stuff. But I think the horror in the show is also really fun, and the way in which it ties together the horror is a curse given to this rich family, I think is super interesting. It also ends up being very vindicated because like the characters in Succession are unlikable in the same way that the Usher characters are unlikable. So watching them get their comeuppance is very cathartic because you want these characters to fail, and to fail so spectacularly makes you go, ooh, oh wow, they shouldn't have done that. And I think there's definitely a level of like horror catharsis in the show that is super satisfying to watch and really well structured. The informant thing also doubles as it shows what each Usher really wants for themselves and what they are trying to gain, because obviously in a very cutthroat family, in a cutthroat industry like this, each Usher is definitely trying to like grab their stake in this because there's so many of them and they all have like their own ventures and they all want to be the best and seen as the best in this family. And so they're all like very ambitious in a way that they're willing to do things, and how each of them kind of do it in a way that is definitely morally questionable, but like serves themselves, I think is super, super interesting. So once everyone is established, the stakes are there, Roderick and Madeline have this kind of like curse, and it establishes this idea that like all of these kids died not because of you, but because of me, of Roderick. Roderick is the one who cursed, or Roderick and Madeline cursed their kids and cursed the Usher family name, and it was only a matter of time until this force comes back and collects after they've been able to prosper so much. So yeah, on to episode 2. Speaking of prospering, episode 2 is primarily Prospero's narrative. So now we see a little bit more into Prospero, what kind of a person he is. This like kind of symbol of hedonism, I guess, right? If he is lust, if you want, for this like Seven Deadly Sins analogy, I think he is very clearly this character of desire, of wants, of like and also of like opulence and like pure like entitlement in a really interesting way. Obviously he's the youngest of the Usher family. There's this really interesting dynamic between the people who are like quote unquote pure blood Ushers and the bastards who were born of like other mothers, which could be like, which eventually comes into this connection to the fact that like Roderick's first wife was the most pure of the Usher family, and yet everyone since then has this kind of curse of, you're not a real Usher, you're this half Usher, and we're better than you. And this entitlement within entitlement, which is like super fun and super interesting, as like all of these people who are already like the top 1% still are trying to put themselves in ranks even within their own family. It's super funny. So Prospero, of course, is seen as this kind of like the youngest, the rejected one, the newest of the Usher family. And so he wants to try and prove himself. And he does so by creating this massive party in which he's going to make a ton of money. And in doing so, like, it's clearly not fully aware of the implications of doing such a thing. He's this young, naive boy who's just trying to prove to his father that he can make some cash. And Roderick has this thing of like, you will earn your money, but you need to work for it to get the kind of grassroots, and not grassroots, but investment that Roderick is going to give to him. When Prospero is introduced at the start of this episode, like already dead at that point, and you see like this kind of like muscle person that has been melted or burnt in some way, immediately that's the first time we've seen one of the Usher family appear within the structure of this narrative. Immediately I thought of Vecna, and I was like, what does Netflix have with like weird muscle bound burnt people? It's this weird connection to, it looks very similar. The styling is very similar. I was like, oh, okay, Netflix horror. Why you want to do this like funny bodysuit, like Guillermo del Toro type people? But I think that was a very clever way to do it because of how visually distinct Prospero is once he dies. To have him specifically show up there in that way immediately throws the audience into, oh, that's what happens. How does that happen to a person? And as the episode kind of unfolds, you see him like look at we find out that the building he uses to throw the party is this chemical facility, and then he wants to connect the sprinklers up into things, and you go, oh, this must be the problem that happens, and it kind of it is really fun to, as a viewer, pick at the little puzzles, because Mike Flanagan has established his ability to like plant Easter eggs everywhere, hidden ghosts, hidden meanings everywhere, and it's such like specific filmmaking in a way that's really, really awesome, and encourages a viewer to really seek out the little details. And so by doing that very early in episode 1 and having Prospero act almost as this tutorial to the user to go, here's how you engage with this media. I will now, you've seen how it happens, so you can now put the pieces together and see if you figure it out before it. And I really, really loved that as a viewing experience. It was very, very enjoyable for me. So within this party now, we also see the kind of appearance of Carla Gugino's character, who is this like temporal force, who is the kind of the manifestation of the Usher curse, who comes in to kind of, in each story now, in each connection with each child, comes into to kind of twist it, to make it bad, to entice what happens to make them die. And I think she's great to be this kind of temptress, like curse lady. She's very, very good. And the way in which throughout the season she is able to portray these kind of different versions of this character, but at its core still be this kind of one unified curse lady, is really, really fun. And I loved seeing how she was able to shift into the different characters as the episodes continue, and she needs to put herself in different situations in order to get in the situations where the characters end up dying. So the eventually Prospero's party happens, and they have that massive like moment. The sprinklers come on, and everyone gets doused in like hazardous chemicals, and they all become this like melted blob of like flesh and muscle, and it's so gross. It's such like a visceral moment that to have it so early on as well, it really sets the tone for the show. And I was sitting there watching going like, oh wow, like that's so like the fact that they did that and had the budget to do that as well, and it felt so practical, it felt so real. Like when Hank goes in, Mark Hamill's character, who is great, and I probably won't talk about as much of this because he doesn't really fit into the narrative of the Usher children, but I think also like is a super interesting character in his own right. Comes in, like picks at people and gets like grabbed by Frederick's wife is oh man, it's so like spine tingling. But I think this episode does a really good job of setting the tone for what will become the structure for the rest of the season. So episode 3 follows Camille. This she is the like kind of media PR person of the family. She runs like the way in which the Usher name is portrayed to the media. She is this kind of like pocket. She's more kind of what you would think of as a Succession character, I think, very much so. Like she's this news magnate who controls information and is specific about how the Usher family are perceived, and always has a way out of things on like a PR level, which is super interesting. And she also has this really like she has this unprofessional relationship with her assistants as well, which again, all of these characters have these kind of aspects of themselves that definitely make them morally evil, quote unquote, within the eyes of the viewer. They do these things that aren't meant to make them likable, for sure, and they definitely do a good job of establishing just how like kind of unlikable these characters are. I think the primary sin that I would say for Camille would be envy. She has this envy for other people about how she has to prove herself, right? She used this business news magnate position to try and convince everyone that she is important, but in reality, she's just jealous of how the others are treated by the family. She wishes she could have that and wishes that she didn't have to work so hard to have that, which connects directly to her relationship with Victorine, who Victorine she believes to be the informant. And she does some more digging into her kind of heart problem. When we see her body at the start of the episode, it's mangled in some way. Victorine, of course, has done these kind of tests on monkeys to kind of fix their heart problem, as it has been lying about how well her kind of heart restarters have been working. The way in which all of these characters' storylines intersect is super well done. Everyone kind of has information on another, and so it creates this web of intrigue that the audience is putting together to be like, well, Camille realizes that Victorine is lying about tests. Victorine is lying about tests because she wants to make sure that her father wants to have human trials because he is suffering from a heart condition, which this kind of technology can fix. So there's all of these kind of layers and connections going on, but no one is actually outrightly speaking to each other. It's the thing, especially about like Camille's character, where her whole thing is PR, her whole thing is communication, and yet the Usher family do not communicate with each other. They don't actually talk to each other about real things. It's all just inference and problems of trying to figure out, really, like, you need to get these trials because I think this will be good for the company, when in actuality Roderick is saying that as, I need you to do this because it could help me, it could save my life, but he doesn't want to admit that. So there is this kind of really interesting communication barrier that happens throughout all of these characters, and yet there are these direct lines that link them all together. So Camille, out of envy, out of jealousy, and ends up going to try and confront Victorine, or at least find out what has been going on in this lab. She goes in, Carla Gugino's character is there as the security guard, who ends up being the kind of force to push her out the door, right into the monkey cages. Now, I don't like monkeys. I'm not a monkey. This is like a big thing for me. This like kind of monkey mauling thing. This and Nope. What is it about monkeys? Can we not do this? Can we not do scary monkeys in things? Because I think it's frightening, and I'm not a big fan. So as soon as you enter the monkey room, I'm like, oh no, this is how it's going to happen. It's going to be one of those, like, it's going to be Nope all over again. And I was like, oh no, I can't. Like the first two major killings of the show are these both like really gruesome attacks that I was like, oh no, like it's definitely like that kind of like gore horror more so than like shock horror. But the way in which Carla Gugino then plays into this like monkey character, she gets personified into this monkey. I love that shot at the end of Camille pulling up the phone, and you see Carla Gugino's character, and then as she pulls up the phone, she transforms into this monkey. That was a really awesome like look at how this character is being manifesting as these certain obstacles that are in the way of each specific child. I think that was a very, very clever touch. So with Camille gone, we move on to episode 4 now. Episode 4 is about Raul Coley's character, Napoleon. Raul Coley, big fan of Raul Coley. I also really like how in this show, he is just kind of playing himself, but an amped up version of himself, especially after Midnight Mass, where he did a really wonderful performance, but a performance that he had to put on an American accent. He really had to step out of his comfort zone, and I think he did a wonderful job. His performance in Midnight Mass is phenomenal, but to see him here in a character that is a lot more fun, and I think that goes for everyone in this show, all of these characters have this kind of like fun to them that you can really see how much the actors enjoyed portraying them and really playing within this kind of more like kind of campy horror space, whereas Midnight Mass is a lot more serious. There's a lot of implications to Midnight Mass on like a religious level. This is definitely more camp horror of like fun, Final Destination type gore horror. And so Raul Coley's character, I think, personifies this the most, of just this like fun dude who's this like kind of rich, a lazy sloth is the sin I gave to Raul Coley's character, because there's a quote of him being like, oh, what do you mean? I just make video games for a living. Like, I don't do anything. I'm not like a Usher dude. I just make games. And so he's a gamer. There's points of him playing like Cyberpunk and like Red Dead Redemption, which I'd love to know, Raul, if you were actually playing those games on set, because that's sick. If they're just like, hey, whatever. He's a Liverpool fan, which he is in real life. This is creeping into levels of power source. It was funny to see things that I've seen Raul Coley talk about in interviews and in podcasts that he enjoys, and seeing him play a character that he also enjoys, I thought was really funny. And I also just really love his performance in this as well. He's this kind of braggadocious guy who also like has this relationship with this guy that he's been seeing, but he doesn't want to bring it up to the family. I would, if I'm within this context of the 7 deadly sins, I would also say the laziness. He can't be bothered. He can't be bothered to share this part of his life. He can't be bothered to do anything more than make video games, which is a very difficult job. Please pay video game people what they deserve. But he's definitely has this era of I'd rather just sit back, drink, and smoke weed. And what happens then is he starts to get haunted by this inaction, right? This cat that his partner owns ends up being this kind of like thorn in his side, which he ends up killing on one night, and then that cat comes back to haunt him. So he goes and buys this cat, brings it home, and the cat doesn't like him. And so the cat ends up being the kind of personification of this kind of itch that's always at his back. He can never really sit still because he always has this kind of nagging thing that is personified by the cat. And eventually that cat turns into Carla Gugino's character. She becomes the cat, or she becomes the person who gives him the cat, and then she becomes the cat as well. She's a metaphysical being, it's whatever. What I thought was super interesting about this episode is that the cat isn't the one to kill Napoleon. What happens is instead the cat drives Napoleon manic because Napoleon then becomes paranoid. It's the paranoia that slowly eats at him, that he's tearing out walls trying to find this cat, until eventually when he goes to grab it, he falls off the balcony. I thought that was a very clever choice because it shows that the problem with Napoleon isn't actually the fact that his fear is physical, but rather it's paranoia. It's a fear of somebody catching up with him, someone realizing that perhaps he's maybe not what he should be. And if he stays in his lane, if he stays back, if he stays lazy, no one can really kind of pull him up on that. But especially at the start of this episode, in last episode where Camille was trying to like push him to be kind of the PR face, he doesn't want to. He definitely wants to kind of take this backseat, and so the cat manifesting itself as this inaction to force him to move, and that ends up being his downfall, I thought was a very, very clever narrative choice. So episode 5 is Victorine's plot. I didn't have a specific sin for Victorine. I guess you could say pride, but I guess you could also say pride for Tamerlane. You could say pride for all of them, really. So, and I don't think this is gluttony either. It might be envy. I don't really know. Victorine, from here on, the 7 deadly sins kind of through line really starts to fall apart, which is why it wasn't the main point. But I think it works well for the first 3, but then the rest of them it's kind of like whatever. So Victorine's plot, of course, is about her heart device that is going to like become this brand new like medical changing technology, which fits into what the Usher family business is, which is medicine. So her partner is this surgeon who they are working on trials to find this kind of like heart device that can help a heart continue to beat. So obviously she's been testing on monkeys. It's not really working. She's kind of flubbing the results to try and make this go to human trials. Carla Gugino's character then comes in as this human trial, the person who will then kind of convince her to kind of push her partner into doing this trial thing. Of course, this ends up being a problem because Victorine just assigns her partner to go, yes, you can do the surgery on this person. It doesn't tell her about it. They start this big argument. They yell at each other, and then Victorine throws something, and then it cuts to black. This is later revealed to be the fact that like Victorine threw something that ended up killing her partner. That was meant to be a twist. I think it was designed to be like a kind of, oh, she actually did kill this person. I didn't think that twist was like super well earned. I definitely kind of saw that one coming. Although, to be honest, it's hard with horror stuff, and especially horror twists, because a lot of it is that kind of, you are meant to kind of figure out what's going on. That's the point. It isn't meant to be super surprising. It's more meant to be cathartic. But I didn't really feel like that one was particularly earned. I didn't really feel like, oh, that was what I thought it was. I felt more like, oh yeah, of course. Like obviously she hit her with something. It's not going to cut to black otherwise. So that twist I thought was a little bit, it was like a little bit expected, but I really like the way in which Victorine kind of goes, her manic thing personifies in her like kind of forcing the device onto her partner, which then before we find that reveal is this ticking noise that she hears, and it's this kind of like tick that she hears over and over again, which that was a twist that I really enjoyed. The fact that this tick that we've been hearing throughout the whole episode that Victorine starts to perceive ends up being the heart device that she self-implanted into her partner. So I thought that was a much better reveal for it. I kind of wish that they had done that earlier and shown her kill her partner and then shown her inserting the device, and then that be kind of the tick. Then be this kind of like that both reveals kind of minimize, like the ticking reveal minimizes the fact that she killed her partner. But I like how this moment especially like Roderick comes and he's there and he's present for the kind of the death, and he sees Victorine stab herself with a scalpel, which immediately undermines the whole plot of them thinking that this curse comes from this woman. And it isn't for a while until Roderick really comes to terms with the fact that this is a curse that's kind of by his own design. And so by witnessing it, I really like the fact that this was kind of the first death that was visibly witnessed by Roderick himself, where it starts to spread doubt in his mind. Roderick also starts to see his dead children at this point and monologues about it to Lenore. Mike Flanagan gets a lot of flack for his monologues. A lot of people don't like this style, especially Flanagan's filmmaking, because of its monologues. I definitely understand that criticism. I think that Flanagan very quickly will rely upon monologues in a way that I think, while I do really love them and think they're beautifully written, can disrupt the pace. I don't think there's ever been I don't think Flanagan's ever written a monologue where I personally have gone, yeah, that was a bit flowery or a bit unnecessary. I think every single one of his monologues are deserving, but I can understand someone who if kind of adverse to that kind of storytelling method, would be kind of would not really like his type of filmmaking. It really works a lot for me, so I really like it, and I like the way in which it's used throughout this whole season, especially in like the kind of the aftermath of Victorine's death, where Roderick's monologues about how he can't have been the one, he's witnessed it, it can't be a curse on him. So episode 6 primarily involves Tamerlane, second eldest of the Usher family. She is the kind of leader of this new kind of tech brand called not tech brand, it's like a kind of pseudo health brand called Goldbug, which she, alongside her partner, have this kind of like fitness kind of health craze thing. They joke about it being pretty much like Goop, which is clever because that's a great way to tell everyone, hey, this is what it's like. I know what Goop is. Everyone knows what Goop is. So by saying it's like Goop within the universe makes sense. And so she's kind of gearing up to this big presentation, the big reveal of Goldbug. She hasn't been sleeping, and the way in which the episode opens with her like kind of dazing in and out of sleepfulness and awakeness, I think was awesome. I really loved the way that the editing flows and you don't really know how much time has passed, and it immediately kind of puts you in Tamerlane's shoes of kind of this confusion of what's going on, where am I, that waking up and not knowing how long it's been. The way in which they use it specifically with Bill, who comes back, they talk, Tamerlane confesses to Bill that, you know what, actually, I'm sorry, I'm just kind of stressed out. It cuts back, Bill's gone. How long has he been gone for? We don't know. And neither does she. And I think that's a really clever use of filmmaking, and especially of time, to have these cuts between her falling asleep and waking up, and suddenly there's just been this gap. So this insomnia ends up kind of being what is her main problem that is personified in this curse. And so as the episode continues on, she gets more and more stressed about this presentation. This insomnia leads to paranoia. She starts seeing visions. Her colleague Gino had already entered her life. She was one of her husband's escorts, and then she's appeared in like videos with him, and she like is kind of worried that she is kind of being followed by this woman, and then sees her in the front row of her press conference, and kind of this triggers this freak out from her, who starts to curse at people, yell at people, breaks television screens. I like the idea of this being like, especially after Camille has died and, you know, the Usher family are already in kind of a PR crisis. Tamerlane does this PR launch that ends up being a complete and utter disaster. And the way in which it deals with like kind of like public cancellation, of that being said, but not in like a fully cancelled way, but in a way that like she has ruined her public image in this act, which is just as like a damning for her. But eventually she goes home and is chased by like her reflection in the mirror. Pride, I think, was the 7 deadly sin for this one specifically, because of the way in which Tamerlane plays with mirrors, especially in this kind of death scene. She keeps seeing her reflection being reflected back, and that reflection being Carla Gugino's character. And she ends up fighting mirrors, fighting these windows, and in her bed, fighting the mirror that is above her as these glass then fall and shatter and like cut her into pieces. All of the Ushers have a problem with self-image, but I think Tamerlane specifically becomes this very focused kind of the crux of her problem is her sense of self and her vision of self and the way in which she needs to present herself and the way in which she needs to hide herself from the public in some ways, and the way in which she, especially because like her husband's escorts, she choreographs as a way how she wants to be but can't, so she watches somebody else to do it. I think that's very clever. All of these characters, their desires, their fears, it all plays in and personifies in a way that their insecurities manifest in their deaths and are also tied directly to who they are as a person and what they do. And so in Tamalene's case specifically, her insecurity of not being what she wants to be, or her worry that she will be perceived in a specific way, ends up being her downfall as she starts to perceive herself in a way that she is not happy with, and that starts to eat at her slowly. As much as the show is about a curse and about supernatural elements, all horror is based in reality, and the way in which this show is actually almost like a metaphor for imposter syndrome, and the way in which like our inner voice tells us we aren't deserving, or will curse us with a sense of insecurity, I think is very interesting. And the way in which the show is not just like an external supernatural force, but the problems of the show are manifestations of each character's insecurities. And oh boy, speaking of insecurities, so this episode is now about Frederick. Obviously, as the show progresses, each character has development outside of just their own episode, obviously. In this case, Frederick's development has been happening for the past episodes, as has Tamalene's before, but for the sake of kind of simplicity, I just wanted to kind of truncate each character's arc to their episode. In this case, this kind of calls all the way back to episode 2, where Frederick's wife went to Prospero's party, ends up getting horribly disfigured, and ends up coming back and ends up causing this tension between Frederick and her, as Frederick starts to think that she's being unfaithful. He doesn't understand why he wouldn't, despite the fact that he's a dickhead. And the way in which he kind of tortures her by putting up these photos of him and slowly drugging her is just absolutely vile. Again, it's an insecurity thing. I think Frederick's deadly sin was wrath, I put, because of the way in which he kind of turns into this being of wrath and rage and anger. Especially towards like this episode where he starts to realize that like he is the last remaining usher, and so the shareholders of the company are going to want, if they want to get rid of the ushers, they're going to have to go through him. And he gets this kind of ego boost from his father as Roderick tells him, you need to tell the stakeholders that they can't come to you. You're the last of the Usher family. You're the eldest of the Ushers, and you can tell them no. And so this kind of goes straight to his head, and ego becomes his main downfall, this sense of entitlement, of righteousness, which ends up manifesting as wrath. Because before this, Frederick was kind of like a pushover. He was this person who would just do whatever his father says, and for the sake of the company, and was a complete pushover, but has now kind of developed into this character of like complete and utter rage and power and ego, which ends up being his downfall. He goes to demolish the building that Prospero's rave was held in, and demands everything of the workers there, says, you must do this now, you must do this here, you have to, and feels the sense of power. And what ends up happening is as he goes in, he meets Carla Gugino's character, who poisons him in the same way that he has been poisoning his wife. And he lays paralyzed in this building as it demolishes around him. His death has been referenced in the beginning. I really love the way in which they've been setting up at this point that the appearance of each child at the start shows how they die. And in this case, where you're expecting to see Frederick, we actually see a young Frederick, him as a child, and his mother, who come up to Roderick, and he's surprised, as is the audience, of like, oh, hang on, I was expecting to see you as an adult dead, but instead here I am seeing you as a kid. And he picks him up, and as he does, his entire bottom half disconnects from his body. And you go, oh, that must be how he dies. And I thought that was a really great reveal. I think that was a super earned twist that immediately, after establishing this very clear structure, Flanagan just completely rejects it in a way that is really surprising. And as an audience member, you go, oh, wow. And it's just this little bit of calm before eventually you see his body disconnect. And it's like, oh, there you go. We're right back into it. As much as this might have been a small victory for Roderick, the feet fall out from under him, if you can forgive the pun. So the way in which Frederick is killed eventually is that as the house is being demolished, this pendulum starts to swing and get closer and closer, and it's just like slowly cut at his stomach until it eventually completely cuts him in half. I don't know about this one. It was a little bit too supernatural for me. I know, like, in comparison to some of the other stuff that has happened in the episode, I go, really, this is the thing that I didn't believe? For sure, 100%. But the way in which the pendulum slowly just kind of comes down bit by bit, I found really kind of contrived, and that was the thing that was my limit. It's weird where people draw their lines, but that was where I drew mine of, I don't know about this one. This one feels a little bit too over the top and campy for me, but I like the way in which it kind of all comes back to circle, that his ego of being the person to make the decisions, eventually at the end, he's still left helpless and unable to do anything and unable to move. His actions are not important. And as a result, he is paralyzed, literally, with an action. And that is what causes his death. Again, insecurities. And that is all of the Usher children dead. The final episode kind of delves into this key storyline that has been happening throughout, that we've been seeing these glimpses of the New Year's Eve party in 1980 and what has happened. Obviously, Roderick has been making his way up the Fortunato ladder and has been seen good in the eyes of the employees. And the only way up from now on is to have the disappearance of the CEO so that Roderick can take over. So in the first episode, we see as Roderick gets into the back of the car, this jester appear, which ends up being like the personification of his inner demon, which I wish kind of showed up a bit more. I don't know if it did. It might have, and I might just not remembering it properly. But I wish that jester was more of a like a motif. But either way, it was memorable enough that by the end of it, in that last episode, when we see the CEO of Fortunato show up in a jester costume, you go, oh, okay, that's the villain. At that point, you can kind of assume that they've killed someone. They talk about alibis in the night, on how, like, on New Year's Eve, they specifically want to stay away from certain people, want to make sure that they can be seen, that the people don't think that they're somewhere else. We don't know what that is, but it's pretty easy to kind of assume what that is. Obviously, that is not the draw of the mystery of this section. It's not about them, it's not about what they did, but rather about hiding what it was. Again, it's part of that puzzle aspect for the viewer to try and figure it out bit by bit and piece by piece, putting together what they're saying to try and see what it is that they've done or what they might have done. Of course, you probably can assume that they've killed someone. The CEO of Fortunato makes the most sense, especially after the whole trial situation, the way in which Roderick has lied on the stand and then established himself as at least a good member of Fortunato. And so his wife, of course, not liking him for this. This proves the kind of ambitiousness and ruthlessness of Roderick and Madeline, and the way in which they're both willing to get to the top regardless of anything, especially considering that their relationship with their mother, which I haven't spoken about this whole video, which I guess kind of shows you how integral that is. I guess it is important to the plot of the story. That is the kind of inciting incident as to why they want the company. Well, I guess it does kind of come into play in the fact that death has haunted the Usher family from the very beginning. So eventually what happens is Roderick's wife is very upset at the fact that he lied on the stand, and she leaves him, but then Roderick and Madeline don't want it to go for nothing, so they end up burying the CEO of Fortunato alive, which is hardcore. It calls back again. All of these times we've seen Roderick talk to the wall. Now we know why. We know what's behind the wall. This episode kind of very beautifully wraps up all of the kind of through lines of the rest of the show. I have not spoken about Lenore, who is a super important character in the show, but ends up being this kind of glimmer of hope in the Usher family. Roderick talks about how she is the best of them, yet she still ends up being killed. Roderick's newest wife ends up just like dissolving the company and selling it, and Frederick's wife ends up donating a bunch of money and stuff like that. The show ends. I'm not a big fan of the ending, the way in which it kind of does here's what happens afterwards. All of the money went to good causes, and at the end of the day, the curse of the Ushers fell with them or whatever. I thought that was a bit. I wish it didn't close all the doors. I kind of wish that they didn't show what happened to the money or what happened to the family. It just felt very conclusion. It felt like a very big and final conclusion, considering that the rest of the show kind of established itself as a cliffhanger with a lot of like intrigue and mystery and a lot of viewer engagement that encourages the viewer to kind of think for themselves. That by the end of it, I was really expecting it to finish with a question and pose that question to the viewer and say, well, what do you think? What do you want to bring from this? What do you take from what happened to the Ushers? But in actuality, what it does is it kind of tells it for you, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I just kind of wish that the show rewarded the viewer more for paying attention to the little things, and instead left them with more questions than answers. But overall, the show was really great. I think it was really campy. I liked the way in which it was structured. I thought it was really super well written. I also like its setting. Obviously, Flanagan's adaptations in the past have kind of loosely adapted the source material, but I feel like the House of Usher, the way in which it modernized it and made it this kind of like the fall of a modern day like family of rich people, I thought was a really clever touch. And the way in which you look at like this feudal idea of like the feudal falling of a cursed house in the modern day, and what that and all of the things that encompasses, whether it's like political fallings, public relation fallings. But at the end of the day, I fell for the House of Usher. It's a beautiful show, and I can't wait for the next thing Mike Flanagan makes. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, leave a comment of who your favorite Usher family member was. I'm a big Raul Coley fan. I've said that from the beginning, so Napoleon was my favorite, but that is a complete and utter bias. If you have a favorite character, and why? What was it about their story or their character? What moment was it for you that made it like super fun and engaging? I really like the show. I don't think there's a wrong answer in that. I think every single character in House of Usher is a good choice to pick. You can pick anyone. But yeah, let me know. I'm really curious to hear what you guys thought of it, and whether you liked it. So thanks for watching. If you like this, subscribe and like and do all those things, and check out my other stuff if you want to. So yeah, goodbye. Thanks.